here last Sunday, we started a brand new series on heroes of the Bible. From Hercules to Robin Hood to the Lone Ranger, history's greatest stars and legends are a roll call of heroes. And no one does heroes better than comic books. For nearly a century, comic book heroes like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Iron Man, Spider-Man, they've captivated comic book fans. And for the last few decades, they've dominated the box office, becoming some of the highest grossing movies of all time. I think the unparalleled popularity of these superheroes all around the globe reveals a spiritual hunger for heroes that's woven into the fabric of the human heart, as though God built us with a persistent longing for a hero who will save us and keep us safe. Now, Paul Harvey. The only drawback when it comes to superheroes is they're not real. As real people have real hardships and hurdles, we need real heroes to inspire and encourage us to model true heroism from a biblical perspective, I think. Lucky for us, the Bible is full of heroes, men and women of God, like Moses, David, Ruth, others. And through their heroism, we can find the inspiration that we need to follow in their footsteps and become, which you guys already are, heroes anyway. Last Sunday, we kicked off the series with the story of Noah. Despite living in a corrupt and cruel world, Noah remained committed to the Lord. He walked in close fellowship with God and carefully carried out all of God's commands, even when they didn't sound reasonable. God became a hero by being different. He was diligent and he was devoted to God. So the next hero we're going to look at is a true faith hero, Abram. Chosen by God to become the spiritual and physical father of a whole new nation, Abram's place in Hebrew history is completely unrivaled. In the New Testament, Paul appeals to Abraham as the preemptuous example in his authority argument for justification by faith apart from works. James, even the brother of Jesus, points to Abraham as verification that faith without action, what good is it? Abraham, in other words, is the great example in faith in action. His story, recorded from Genesis 12, chapter 12 to chapter 25, takes many twists and turns. So it's going to be impossible for me to touch every aspect of his faith journey, even though we don't have a clock in here anymore. Still, I'd like to highlight, I think, three qualities of his faith that made him a hero of faith. First, Abraham became a hero because he had prompt faith. Prompt faith? What's that? Well, it means ready in action, quick to act on an occasional demand, which is a description of Abraham and his faith in God. His story began with these words. Beth told us, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, your family, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. Everybody on the earth will be blessed through you. Now, I know everybody here, they kind of know him as Abraham. But he was called Abram at this point in life. And he came from an ancient town called Ur. And they worshipped a whole lot of false gods. And Joshua says Abraham and his family kind of indulged a little too. So when God told Abram to get up, leave his home, travel to a far-off land where he's going to make you a great nation, I'm convinced if he's anything like me, he would have had a lot of questions. Remember, they had many gods in this town, so I'm sure he was saying, who is this God telling me to leave my country? What about the other gods my family worship? Are they real too? Okay, where's this land? How far away is it? I need to know these things. To become a great nation, I need children. But I'm 75 years old, and my wife and I, we don't have any kids yet. How am I going to be a great nation of people? Abram had countless reasons to say no to God, but instead of being like me, he said yes. And the very next word says, he packed up, departed as the Lord had instructed. Didn't even put it in the GPS. But notice, his family went with him, to include his dad. While he did leave the country, he didn't technically leave immediately his family. The second call was received after his father and the whole family had moved out of Haran. And this call made after his father died was to go to the land of Canaan. As we examine his life, we discover that his journey from zero to hero was a long one. Yet his life became one of the most important in history of Christianity and Judaism. We will also discover that the attributes that took him to hero status was faith. He trusted God for guidance. And the author of Hebrews informs us that Abraham did not know where he was going. Now, can you imagine being told, get in the car, have your kids follow you, go down to Highway 70, turn and go west, and keep going? Could you imagine saying yes, getting in the car and heading out, not even telling your boss you're not going to be at work tomorrow? Today, we have the GPS that aids us to make our trip, but you know what? What good would that do if we didn't even know where we were going? To plug in where the inside was so it could let us know. Could you imagine your neighbors when they found out what you were doing and why they would call you a fool for embarking on such an area? Now imagine what Abraham must have endured. His family and friends, they had to have asked him what he was doing when they saw him pack it up. And I'm sure they probably gave their opinion and gave it loudly. Maybe even his own immediate family said they thought he was crazy, and today they'd say he's delusional or something. You know, we're going to get him to the hospital. But he trusted the unseen God. That was his first call. God said go. Abraham said, yes, sir. Abraham's faith was so great that he was not concerned as to where he was going. His faith displaced all worry as to where he was going. He did not trouble to think upon the matter because he trusted the person that told him to go. Now this could not have been an easy experience. His whole life, his family, his friends, his livelihood were all there in his homeland, all here in Switzerland. Yet he trusted his God to immediately obey. The word should be translated this way. By faith, Abraham, while he was being called, obeyed. It indicates that Abraham's immediate response to the God was obedience. And this is the expectation of God for all of his children. Such blind trust sometimes is required because he knows the big picture. We don't. Our only response to God's direction should be trust and obey. It is never easy just to trust because we think we must have all of the information, at least I do, in front of me, so I've got an idea so that I can trust because I can see what I'm going to be doing. And yes, I think it'll work. But that's not trust. That's walking by sight, not by faith. Bob Utley said it best when he commented, God is not looking for super saints, but for flawed humans who will respond to Him in repentance and faith and live for Him regardless of the circumstances. Are you trusting God for guidance in your life? Do you believe that God will lead you to where you need to be for His honor and glory, not necessarily our own? Are you living for Him where He has led you to? And are you trusting His continued guidance in your life? The second thing about Abraham being a hero is he had a patient faith. Remember, when God called Abram, He promised to make him a great nation. In fact, later God took Abram aside and said to him, look up to the skies, and we didn't have a cloudy day and it wasn't raining, and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you're going to have. And then God announced, what's more, I'm changing your name. You're no longer going to be Abram. Instead, you're going to be called Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. Abram means exalted father. Abraham meant father of many. God wanted Abraham's very name to reflect the certainty of his future. As I told you a little bit ago, though, he was 75. And his wife, Sarah, would have been about 65. Much too old to have a baby under normal circumstances. But Abraham trusted and believed God that God would keep His promise. But it didn't happen immediately, did it? He waited, and waited, and waited, and waited. Hours passed by days, and weeks went to months, and months into years, years into a decade. And Abraham grew old, his hair was gray, his body was weak. He still waited for God to keep His word. God doesn't always wait patiently. Abraham didn't always wait patiently. Occasionally, doubt would creep in. Is God really going to keep His promise? Has He forgotten about me? I know, maybe I was hallucinating and it was just a dream. After 11 years of waiting, Abraham's wife even suggested that he should have a child from one of her handmaids, like a surrogate mother. Even worse, Abraham went along and said, hey, that sounds like a great idea. And as we all know, it ended in disaster. But that's a story we're going to have another time. God had to repeatedly assure Abraham that He would keep His promise and that Sarah was going to be the biological mother of his child. Abraham learned patience the hard way by waiting and waiting and waiting. Finally, when he was 100 years old, and that made Sarah about 90, God gave him a child, Isaac, the son of promise. Abraham waited 25 years for God to fulfill His promise. 25 years. That's a long time. Could you imagine your boss saying, I'm going to promote you at some time soon, and finally get a promotion 25 years later? We usually think of heroes as men and women in bold action. And that's often true. But heroes also know how to wait patiently on the Lord, especially spiritual heroes. In one of his many psalms, David urges believers, wait patiently for the Lord, be courageous and brave. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. That was out of the 27th Psalm. In David's mind, courage and bravery go hand in hand with patience. There was an archbishop once said, patience is power. Patience is not an absence of action, rather it is timing. It's waiting for the right time to act, for the right principles and the right way. Or, as Captain America would say, patience is one of the most valuable traits a student or a soldier can have. Sometimes patience is the key to victory. We don't go off in half-cocked. As Abraham learned, the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, but God's timing is not necessarily ours. He acts according to his schedule, not ours. And waiting on God can be tough, but waiting can produce patience, perseverance, and faith. And finally, in addition to a prompt and patient faith, he wielded a proven faith. In Ken Davis, in his book, How to Speak to Youth, told of the time he was in speech class, and this is what he wrote. We were to be graded on our creativity and ability to drive home a point in a memorable way. And the title of my talk was The Law of the Pendulum. I spent 20 minutes teaching the physical principles that govern a swinging pendulum. The law is it can never return to a point higher than the point from which it is released because of friction and gravity. And when it returns, it will fall short of its original release. And each time it swings, it makes less and less of an arc until finally it is at rest. This point of rest is called the equilibrium, where all forces acting on the pendulum are equal. So we attached the 3-foot string to a boy's toy and secured it to the top of the blackboard with a thumbtack. He pulled the top to one side and marked it on the blackboard where it was to go, and each time it swung back, he made a new mark. In less than a minute from the top completely, it's swinging and came to rest. And then he asked how many people in the room believed the law was true. And he said all my classmates raised their hand, and so did the teacher. So he started to walk to the front of the room thinking the class was over, but it wasn't. Hanging from the steel ceiling beam in the middle of the room was a large, crude, but functional pendulum. 250 pounds of metal weights tied to 4 strands of 500-pound parachute cord. He said he invited the instructor to climb up on the table and sit on the chair with the back of his head against the cement wall. And then he said, I placed the 250 pounds of metal up to his nose, holding the pendulum just a fraction of an inch from his face. I once again explained the law. And if it's true, then when I release this mass of metal, it will swing across the room and return short. Your nose will not be in danger. I looked into his eyes and asked, Sir, do you believe this law is true? Heads bend of sweat formed in his upper lips, and he finally whispered, Yes, I believe it. It made a swishing sound. As it arced across the room and on the far end, it paused a moment and started back. And he said, I never saw a man move so fast in my life. He literally dived off the table. I asked the class, does he believe in the law of the pendulum? Did he? No. It's easy to say you believe in something. It's a much difficult thing to prove it. And that's what the 22nd chapter of Genesis is all about. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. Why test him? Because it's easy to say that you believe in something. It's a much difficult thing to prove it. Several years later, in an unexpected turn of events, the Lord instructed Abraham, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. Can you imagine what Abraham must have been thinking? I can just think of myself if he'd have done that with one of my kids. God, have you lost your mind? How could a good God actually ask me to do such a thing? Now, you and I have the benefit of knowing how the story ends. We know that God never intended Abraham to sacrifice his son. He hates human sacrifices. The story begins by saying God tested Abraham's faith. God's command to sacrifice his son was intended to test his faith. And amazingly, as we know, he passed it. But the story is, he got up early, he gathered firewood, and saddled the donkey. They set out for the place where they were going, and after 3 days, he came to servants and said, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I are going to go travel up, and we will worship there, and then we'll be back. Abraham, you notice, said, and then we will come right back. Despite God's command to sacrifice his son, Abraham was confident that both he and Isaac was going to return. A little later, Isaac noticed that they had the wood, but they didn't have the land. And when he asked the father about it, Abraham replied, I will provide for the burnt offering, my son. Again, Abraham's word demonstrated his faith. Faith that God would keep his promise and save his son. And as we know, that's what God did. Because as he built God on the hill, he built the altar, he arranged the wood, he prepared to sacrifice his son. But as he was about to take his knife, an angel shouted, Abraham, Abraham! Yes, the angel said, don't kill your son or hurt him in any way. I see that you trust God and that you have not kept your son, your only son, from me. Just then, he spotted a ram caught in some thicket, and he took the ram, sacrificed it. The Bible summarizes the story by saying it was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. He reasoned that if Isaac died, God would bring him back to life. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back. Wow. Abraham really possessed spiritual hero faith. Still many, I think, wonder why would he even test him in such a way? It seems cruel. The story of Abraham and Isaac, though, is a story of a loving father willing to offer his only son as a sacrifice for sin, knowing that he would receive his son back from dead. Does that sound familiar? God strategically scripted Abraham's story in order to foreshadow the death and resurrection of God's only begotten Son, Jesus. In proving his faith, he became part of a much greater story and helped pave the way. Fred Craddock once told a story of a guy that was a missionary, was sent to preach the gospel in India at the end of World War II. For many months, the time came for him to come home. His church wired him some money to book passage on a steamer. But when he got to the port, he discovered a boatload of Jews who had escaped from Germany had just been allowed to land temporarily. And they were wandering and had no place to go. They were all crammed up in this little attic. And it happened to be Christmas. And on Christmas morning, the missionaries went to one of the attics where the Jews were staying. He walked in and said, "Merry Christmas!" The people looked at him as if he was crazy and said, "We're Jews." "I know that," he said. "What would you like for Christmas?" In an utter amazement, they responded, "Why, we like pastries, like the ones we used to have in Germany." So he went out, used the money for the ticket home, and bought pastries for all the Jews he could find staying at the port. Of course, when he had to wire home for more money to book his passage, His superiors wired back, asking what happened to the money they'd sent. He wired that he'd used it to buy Christmas pastries for some Jews. His supervisors wired back, "Why did you do that? They don't believe in Jesus." He wired back, "Yes, but I do." Of all the heroes, Abraham is perhaps the definite hero of faith. He employed prompt faith, ready and willing to answer God's call. He waited 25 years for God to fulfill His promise, and willing to make the greatest sacrifice imaginable, knowing that God would show up and save the day. So I hope Abraham's story inspires you to develop a deeper, more dynamic faith in the Lord our God, so that you can maintain and keep being what you are, a true hero of faith. That's what you guys are. Thank you.